Hey, what's up guys? Damien here with another video. Today I thought I'd talk about a really cool way of being able to see the effect of plugins on top of your own tracks. So I was taught this by my mentor. It's a really cool way, probably one of the most basic ways of being able to hear what's actually happening with the effects. But this is a really cool way to dial in certain effects that you may not be too accustomed to hearing yet, like compression, saturation, and all that, and just really see what's happening to your track, as well as seeing, some of the more nuances to some of the plugins that we can use in a mastering context and how it could actually be doing damage to your track, right? So this technique is simple, but sometimes it's the most simplest techniques that kind of get left behind. So today I'm going to show you this technique, show you how you can use it in a bunch of different circumstances, and I'll show you how to build a little rack inside of Bitwig that'll help you just be able to check this out and do this every single time. So today I'm going to be showing you something called a delta null rack, right? So again, this is something that was shown to me by my mentor, but essentially what you can do here is I have a track here. So if I go ahead and play this. So we have some audio coming through here. What I'm going to do is now I'm going to put that delta null rack on top of it. And now when we have this on, effectively, when we hit play, we get nothing, right? Because what we're doing is we are using the signal and inverting that signal. And what that's doing is obviously nulling out, right? So we get literally no audio because those flipped polarities are canceling each other out. So when the polarity of a waveform is flipped, that will always kind of just cancel out that sound. And if you get a perfect flip of those polarities, you won't hear any audio, right? So this is the first step that we need to achieve with the delta rack. Now, why would you want to do this, right? Other than just flipping the phase? Well, there's a couple things, right? What this allows us to do is this allows us to hear the difference between them, right? So if I make any changes to one of these tracks, I'm going to be able to hear that difference. Now, this comes in very much so handy when we're talking about compression. This is one of the ways that I learned how to use compression in a very easy way. Other than, listening and doing the ear training, right? This is going to be a really easy way to hear what the compressor is actually pulling out. So a lot of new modern compressors will have like a delta switch, right? Delta meaning you're going to be hearing the difference, what the plugin is necessarily taking out. You'll hear it in plugins like Soothe. Some dynamic EQs have the delta switch. Some compressors have it. Some saturators also have it as well. But what's cool about this method is this allows you to hear the delta of any plugin. So you can hear the changes and how it's affecting the actual track. Again, what we're going to hear is the difference. So what is this tool actually imparting on our audio? So this comes in handy with compression because this allows you to really intuitively be able to set your attack and release times and kind of understand what the attack and the release time is actually doing to the audio. So really quickly here, I'm just going to put the ratio on 4. And what we're going to hear now is, for instance, if I have this compressor turned off, we get silence, right? We don't hear any audio. But if I have this compressor on, now that it's going to be doing gain reduction, we're going to be hearing a difference in signal. So this really helps to be able to set our compressor and be able to hear what it's taking out. Yes, you would want to be able to do this without nulling it, but I will say that this is a really cool way of hearing what the compression is doing. And for me, this is helping me set up even more accurate attack and release times because yes, you can listen to the compressor without it nulled, for instance, like this. And you can get a sense of what the compressor is doing to the full audio, but you can't hear what it's taking away, right? You only hear the difference. So what I like is to be able to hear what it's taking away. And depending on what I want to do with this compressor, right? This is kind of like a glue compressor, but depending on what I want to do with this compressor, I can set the attack and release times appropriately. So if I want to have more punch in, let's say, the transients or whatever this is latching to, which again, this is in the context of a full mix, I could have it a slower attack time, and that's going to give me a little bit more punch through because it's going to wait till the transient actually shows its face, and then it's going to start compressing after that. So you can get more punch, and we can kind of see how the needle and what we're pulling out is actually responding to that. And then the faster that we actually put the compressor, right, that's going to be taking more of the transient away. So we're going to actually hear more transient being taken away in the signal, because remember, what we're hearing is actually what we're taking away. What you'll notice is when you have slower attack times, you get more of like this emphasized pumping, and that's because we're avoiding the transient and we're actually attacking the more sustained part of the audio with the compressor, right, and the compression. And then I especially like this kind of method, especially when we are listening for the release time, because this really helps us intuit. Yes, you can see, the movement of the actual needle here, but it helps us really intuit what we're actually doing with the attack and release time. You can see as we go faster, we get more of this exaggerated movement, more rhythmic movement. And if we go slower, it's a little bit more transparent. So if I'm going for something more rhythmic, I can kind of dial that in. And then at just, a glance, if I want to see how this is actually affecting the audio, right? Because I don't want to make all my decisions from this, null delta point of view. This just really helps to kind of set the attack and release and exactly where my threshold is to tell me what I'm taking away from the track, right? Now, then I can then mute the actual track. And now that I mute the invert, all I'm going to hear is just the track by itself. So it's really, really handy for compression. Another cool thing that you can do once you build this is that what we can do here is we can come to our actual mapping. And what I can do here is you can see that now, there's a lot of things that are highlighted green, but what I can do now is I can come to this mute, touch that mute, and I can touch any key either on my keyboard or on, any one of my MIDI controllers. And I'm just going to, for example, say touch 8 here. And when I take this off now, I can just have a delta button. So this really makes dialing in your compressor, especially ones without delta, like a lot of these analog style compressors, a lot more simple. So I can dial in, my exact attack. And then switch between the delta and the invert signal. So really, really awesome. Another thing that it's really good at is being able to hear, especially in a mastering or a mix bus connotation, it's really nice to be able to hear what multiband tools do, right? So this is also another good learning tool, right? We can use this to learn a lot about our plugins. But essentially, for instance, let's open up ProMB. This is a really cool multiband compressor tool. It's actually toted by FabFilter that this dynamic phase mode isn't going to cause any phase smearing. And you can see that that's actually accurately reflected, because what we can do here is we can create a band. We can actually reduce the ratio of the compression, meaning it's at 1, it's going to be doing 0 compression. So effectively, if we null these, this should be 100% silent if there's no phase smearing happening. So let's see, we're going to hit play. And we get 0 audio, meaning that we're having a perfect cancellation. Now, what's super interesting is that in minimum phase mode, right? This is dynamic phase mode, which is kind of like a mix of a very low latency mode and a linear phase mode. So we're not getting any kind of phase smearing unless we actually mess with the output makeup gain of these bands. But if we put it into, let's put it into minimum phase mode and let's hit play, right? We have 0 compression happening. Let's see what we hear now once we have it in minimum phase mode. So now we're actually hearing the crossovers. So meaning, between these bands here, like if I was to create another one side by side with it, you can see how these kind of cross over between each other. So what we're actually hearing now is the crossovers in these bands, which again, minimum phase isn't always bad. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is what this delta feature allows us to do is to hear those crossovers. And it allows us to adjust and put those crossovers in a section of our track that is going to have the most impact. The danger with having these crossovers in our tracks is that we can accidentally maybe place them on a fundamental of a really main component of our song, like for instance, the kick or a fundamental of a snare or something along those lines. So what's really cool is we can actually listen for that crossover and hear where we're placing it. In multiband tools that don't have linear phase or like Pro MB's dynamic phase. So as we move this around, we can kind of hear that crossover actually shift over. So it's really, really awesome to use that delta, because even if there was a delta button on here, it'd probably only delta the actual compression taking place, and it wouldn't actually delta the crossovers of you being able to hear where those are at, right? So this is just another added benefit of being able to really tell, especially like in a master or on a mix bus or something like that. Now, again, if we have it in dynamic phase mode, we get 0 audio because we're getting a perfect cancel, meaning now when we actually apply compression, we're only going to hear the compression. That's the difference between the signal, right? So let's turn this ratio back up. Another cool thing, right? Because another cool reason to use the delta feature, because again, if we were using just the regular Pro MB, so we can, let's hit 8 and mute that. So now we hear just the track. Even if we were to solo this band, this isn't the delta. We're just going to be able to hear what's in this crossover, right? What's in this band. So even though this is a very intuitive compressor, and we can kind of look at this, graph here that's showing us our gain reduction. And we can kind of intuit a lot of stuff, right? The speed of the release, the attack, all that great stuff. The hard knee obviously means, a little bit more aggressive on transient. Soft knee is doing some pre-compression there. That's great if you understand the tool, but if you are just learning, this is a really great way to learn. Because again, even here, if I delta it now, let's hit 8. And unsolo. I can hear the effect of my attack and release times because I'm only hearing what it's actually pulling out of the track. So it really makes it just easy as hell to dial in certain compressor effects, anything that's dynamically moving, all of that great stuff. It's really easy. And I actually really started discovering this more because in my favorite EQ, which is the Kirchhoff EQ, inside of that, their dynamic feature, their dynamic bands that they have, you are able to actually delta those bands. So that's what really helped me starting to understand how to use dynamic tools to shape the frequency space by hearing what it's actually taking out, right? So that's another cool thing to do. And then one of the other last things is just saturation. So if I was to go ahead and put something like Saturn here, my stock preset on Saturn is in linear phase mode. So you're not going to hear the crossovers again. So if we were to turn our invert back on, right, we should just hear the effects of the saturation. Now, if I was to turn this linear phase off, we are going to hear the crossovers again. Again, that's why sometimes having this linear phase mode, if you're going for absolute pristine clarity, sometimes having this on when you're mastering a track, especially when you're creating all of these crossovers, can really help to clean things up and to keep your fidelity high. Let's take this off and see what it does. So not only we're hearing the effects of the saturation, but we're also hearing the crossover, meaning where these frequencies are getting smeared, because wherever these crossovers are, we're getting some smearing happening there. And again, this is a technical thing. This doesn't mean never use multiband tools, right? But this is something to just say that, we can avoid a lot of this, these issues here by using this linear phase mode. Because as soon as I turn this back on, we're not getting those smearings happening at those crossovers, which allows us to get a little bit more higher fidelity. Like I said in my last video, phase smearing isn't the worst thing. Sometimes it's actually nice. It sounds great to our ears, right? It helps us blend in gestalt sounds together, but not when it's happening on your fundamental frequencies, especially of like your kick or your bass or your snare or whatever it is, right? That can actually just really take away the transient clarity, the impact of those sounds. So using, this high fidelity kind of linear phase mode is really nice. But again, this delta mode allows us to see this. So let's build this, right? So it's very, very simple on how we can build this, right? So the first things first is we need an effects layer. The effects layer is the most important piece to this because the effects layer is not a chain. So a chain is going to work, linearly, meaning we put an effect on, it's going to go into the next effect, into the next effect, right? And this is going to go like serial, right? If you put this, it's going to go into this, right? In an effects layer, it's more like this, right? Where we have a parallel signal. So we have the audio going into this one, and then coming out together, right? So with our first layer, what we want to do is we want to put some type of plugin that allows us to flip the phase. So my favorite one is, again, just the Kirchhoff, because it's a EQ that has the polarity flip inside of it. This can be any plugin that has the polarity flip inside of it, as long as it's not applying an effect. Because remember, if you change one piece of the audio to get that cancel, it has to be perfectly the same. So we want to be doing no effect processing at all. So if I use this EQ, I'm not pushing bands up. I'm not doing anything other than just having this polarity flip switch. But on the first one, we're not going to do that. So we're going to put an EQ on the first one. I'm going to duplicate this. I have a second version. On the second version, I'm going to flip the polarity. Once we get that, we come to our first one, simply rename this one dry or whatever you want to call it as being the original. It could be OG. however you want to put it. And this one is going to be the inverted signal. So we have the inverted signal there. And so now effectively when they are played together, you get nothing. But then when you mute this one, right, then you get, that silence and audio. The second thing that you're going to want to do is then save that as a preset. So you click here, save that as a Delta preset or whatever you want to call it. Save that so you can just recall this every single time. Now to get the effect that we were going for, where we can hear what's happening with any one of our plugins, from saturation to compressors, all that great stuff, you're going to come to the dry, and in the dry chain here, making sure that you're in these like little blue lines here. But in the dry chain here, you add whatever plugin that you want to be able to hear that difference. So again, you can put EQs, saturations, and I would say just doing this one at a time, right, with each of the tools just really helps kind of solidify that in, right? So having your compressor or your EQ or your saturator or whatever it is that you're kind of studying and hearing that delta, you'll put it in this blue. And then because that plugin is the one thing that's different in the chain, now when you invert the signals, right, you're going to be able to hear the effect of that plugin. Second thing that I would do too is every time you probably open this rack, this null rack, one thing to do is maybe come to the mappings here and just always map that mute button on the invert to a specific key. So again, we have that set to 8. I'm going to close that. And then again, when I hit 8, I can mute and unmute it, which becomes like a handy delta button that I can use for anything, right? I've also used this as a way to mute certain things, but remember they have to be exactly identical. So make sure if you want to use this as like a mute, you also remember that it has to be exactly the same. And I think that pretty much covers this really cool trick. Again, this isn't something that's, profoundly new to maybe, some of you, but this has really improved my ability to be able to dial in compression and really hear compression and hear a lot of other effects that can be, affecting my master or the fidelity of my audio. So that wraps it up for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Every one of those helps the channel grow and gets this information to more people. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.